Hello, everybody. My name is Pedro Fortuna. I'm CTO and co-founder of Jscrambler. I also sit at the board of advisors of the PCI SSC, and since last week, I'm also an ISA. Thanks. I've been working in security for 20 years, and the last 16 of which I've been focused on client-side security, more specialized in ensuring the integrity of scripts running on the browser. So today we're going over a very quick primer on e-scheming and on the historical role of using iframes to defend against them. And then we'll go through a series of attacks against payment iframes and defenses. So simply put, e-scheming is the digital equivalent of a skimming attack. There are several ways it can unfold. It can, for instance, you can have a JavaScript component becoming compromised, and later the merchant will download this file or link to this file. Or it could be that the attacker will just look for a vulnerability, like an injection vulnerability or a misconfiguration on the merchant website, and then plant the JavaScript. Either way, the website is now compromised. The attacker has the ability to inject arbitrary code on the merchant page. And if this is an e-scheming attack, we call this injected JavaScript a web skimmer. And its sole purpose is to wait for an unsuspecting user to enter the cardholder data into the payment form and then exfiltrate this data back to the attacker. So one way to reduce the risk of skimming attacks is to iframe the payment form. So usually done by a third-party service provider or a PSP. And it's usually a cross-origin iframe. Because a script running on the parent page on the merchant environment will not have direct access to the iframe document and vice versa. Okay, so no direct skimming is possible. And it creates an effective segmentation between the merchant environment and the PSP environment. So if a malicious script lands on the parent page, we used to believe that there was no way for this malicious script to be able to skim the data from the iframed payment form. And for that reason, it was used as a justification to descope the merchant environment in a DSS assessment. So we got the iframed payment forms, but is it really true that a skimming attack originating from the parent page will not be able to skim the data from the iframe payment form? Spoiler alert, it's still possible. And I will show you that in a couple of minutes. So let's go on with some attack and defending examples against payment iframes. But before that, we can split e-skimming attacks against iframed payment forms in two groups. You have double-entry skimming attacks, in which the normal flow of the cardholder is disrupted somehow. I'll give you an example. For instance, if we overlay a fake iframe on top of the real iframe, and we trick the user into entering data into the payment form, then at a later stage, the user might be shown an error, and then might be asked to enter the payment information again on this time around on the real form. And the reason for that is because you don't want to disrupt payments, because otherwise, there's a lot of abandoned carts, and it's probably easier for the merchant to detect this situation. Okay? And you have silent scheming, where both from the merchant perspective and the cardholder perspective, there is nothing different. So it's not disrupted, but the data is still schemed. So obviously, this latter is more concerning because it's harder to detect and it can stay active for longer. So these e-skimming attacks against iframed payment forms were not really well known or addressed in PCI DSS version 3, but hopefully this talk will create awareness for that. So I'll show you a few examples of double-entry skimming attacks and then a couple of silent skimming ones. So there's an important assumption that I need to underline. All the examples that you will be shown presume that the attack comes from a compromised script running on the parent page. There are other ways to attack the iframe payment form, but they might presume other things, like complete ownership of the backend of the merchant, for instance. In our examples, we don't go that far. All it takes is one script compromised on the parent page. So example number one, a form overlay. So in this example, the PSP does what it normally does. It creates the iframe. It points the iframe to secure.psp.com. And then the real iframe is shown. But immediately after, without the user be able to tell, the compromised script will create a fake form and will lay this fake form exactly on top of the real iframe. So in this case, what will happen is when the user fills in the form and submits the form, because it's a form, the whole page will be navigated away to another site. So, and then the attacker needs to do something in order for the user not to suspect that something happened. But we say this is a double entry attack because it disrupts the payment, okay? So the user might be suspicious. And in this case, it would navigate the page away to evil.com. So to address this problem, obviously, because like your first line of defense might be an email coming from the cardholder, so you will want to look at any interactions with your users because they might tip you off. In addition, you can use website monitoring tools because they might detect that there is a malicious script exhibiting malicious behavior on your website. This is usually done by an agent. And we, like other vendors, offer this type of solution. And we also offer synthetic user scanning, which is an alternative way of detecting and monitoring websites that doesn't use an agent. In alternative, we can ask the PSP to extend their own monitoring to the parent page. So some PSPs will be able to do that so that you don't have to. So it's just a matter of talking with your PSP to find if they do that. Problem number two, iframe overlay, almost exactly like the previous one, but this time around it's not a form overlaying the real iframe, it's another iframe. So the difference here is that the whole page will not be navigated away, it will be just the iframe. So it's probably easier for the attacker to disguise this attack, okay? And you can use exactly the same things I've mentioned before, and you can also use content security policy child source to make a list of the URLs that you allow your script, your page to iframe to. So this is a nice complement to all the other that I've mentioned. Number three, iframe hijacking. This is a little bit harder to execute because now the compromised script needs to be able to execute first, otherwise it won't work. And so the compromised script starts executing, and what it will do, it will modify the implementation of a DOM function, in this case, the iframe set attribute. So later, when the PSP is creating the iframe, like it normally does, at some point it will call this set attribute, but instead of calling the default browser implementation of this function, it will call the compromised version of this function. And that implementation will basically ignore the URL passed to the function and will replace it with evil.com. And to defend against this attack, you can use exactly the same things that I've mentioned in the previous attack, so I won't go over it again. So let's move on to the silent skimming ones. And believe it or not, the one problem is just messing up the iframe implementation by not making the iframe cross-origin. So in that case, it will be same origin, which means that any script running on the top window will have direct access to the iframe payment form, and this is a direct skimming. You may ask, why do people do this? I ask the same thing, but the fact is that we found a couple of people in the wild doing this. So watch out for this one. And the fix here is really, really simple. You need to fix the implementation of the iframe by making it cross-origin. You can do that by just moving away the iframe document to another origin, to another domain. It could be a subdomain. That's fine. Or you need to sandbox the iframe, and that will make it cross-origin as well. Another thing that you can do is just get yourself a PSP iframe payment form. And that for sure will make it cross-origin because they don't own your domain, they don't own your origin. So we are down to the last example, and it's around insufficient payment iframe validation. So it is possible to design an attack where you lay out a same origin iframe on top of the real iframe. And so if it's same origin, the skimmer can collect the data. And then when the user submits the data will be posted to the second step of the normal flow. So it doesn't disrupt the payment, and the attacker is able to skim the data. There are ways for the PSP to detect this, but based on our research, most PSPs are not defending against this currently. So let me show you that live, or almost live because it's a video. And first, I'll start the PSP backend, and then I will load the merchant website. And the first run, there's no compromised script. So this is the normal user flow. So you get acquainted with this flow. And as you can see, the iframe is cross-origin. So it's loading from psp.com/form.html. So that is the iframe document. Okay? And if we look inside the iframe, we will see the details on the form. And as you will be able to see, it will post the cardholder data to psp.com/submit-payment. Okay? So that will be the second step. So when we fill the payment form, we submit the payment form, and you will see the second step, which in this case is just a message saying payment received, thank you. Okay? So next, we will, here on the back end of the PSP, you get the cardholder details. Obviously, this is not a real system. And you have the origin header from psp.com and the refer header, psp.com/form. So you can validate that if you want. And this will be important in a second. So now I'm adding the compromise script to the page, and I'll be doing the same thing again. Let me reload the page, and obviously you can see like the overlaid iframe, and on the right you see this little dialog represents the view of the attacker. And it detects two iframes. One is same origin, the top one, the fake iframe. And let me show you how this was done in this example. So we take a peek at the compromise script, and what it's doing is creating dynamically another iframe. It's getting a copy of the real iframe document. The whole document is assigned to a variable, and then using the source doc of the iframe, we just put that in. So the iframe will look exactly the same. And then we just laid it exactly on top of the real iframe. It's as simple as that. So aspect ratio will be the same. Everything will be the same, but it's the same origin iframe when done this way. So let me fill the payment form again. And then we'll click that little skim button on the right to prove that we have access to the data. And as you can see, but the user will still be able to submit the form normally, so he won't suspect anything. So you can see the payment received. You can still see like the little like green bar, but that's because it's a demo. In real life, you wouldn't see anything. So you can see from the PSP perspective, you get the data, but the origin and refer headers have different values. You have the origin and URL of the merchant, not of the iframed payment form document. All right? So to defend against this, as you can imagine, it's just like the PSP can and must validate the refer and origin headers when they are posted on the second step. Otherwise, they might be fooled by this type of approach. So I'm getting to the final slides of the presentation. So historically, we have used the iframing of the payment form. Usually, the motivation was to descope the merchant environment from PCI DSS in version 3, and it leveraged the same origin policy, so it created the isolation. Naturally, attackers, when faced with obstacles, they evolve. So they found ways to still be able to scheme the data, even if you are using a cross-origin iframe of the payment form. These attacks were already possible in DSS version 3, but we weren't really that aware or addressing this type of attacks, but we now know, and that's one of the motivations for the 2 new e-skimming requirements in DSS v4 being applicable in SAQ-A, okay? So we walked through a series of attacks and defenses against payment iframes. We talked about double entry skimming attacks. We talked about silent skimming. And I want you to take away that, obviously, we should prioritize silent skimming attacks because they are more difficult to detect and they can do more damage, all right? But just think about all the things I've said that could help defend against this type of attacks. And that's it. I'll leave you with an iframe attack prevention cheat sheet. If you want, you can take a snap. And that's all I had for today. Thank you.